How I Got Here, the inside stories of startups and innovation in travel and transportation, with your hosts, PhocusWire's Kevin May and Mozio's David Litwak.
Hello and welcome to How I Got Here. This is Mozio and PhocusWire's weekly podcast where we interview the innovators and entrepreneurs in travel and transportation. Thank you very much to everybody tuning in. As always, a very warm welcome this week to Rajesh Magow. He is the group CEO and a co-founder at MakeMyTrip, which for most of you will know is the giant India-based online travel agency. Rajesh's backstory is quite interesting. He joined the company as co-founder alongside Deep Kara in 2001. And then there was we'll get into this in a moment with Rajesh. There was the time when he was kind of working on the Ebookers part of what was going on there in India, but then came back full-time in 2005, 2006, which actually does coincide with when things really did start to ramp up for MakeMyTrip around that time. MakeMyTrip is now a publicly listed company and it's gone on to great and powerful things and has interesting agreements with the likes of C-Trip in many of its later years. So we're going to get into all that. But first of all, a very warm welcome, as we say, to Rajesh Magow. Thank you very much for joining us, Rajesh.
Thank you, Kevin, for having me. Thank you for the kind words in the introduction as well.
No bother at all. As is tradition with the How I Got Here podcast, each week with our guests, we ask them to give us a bit of their backstory with the question, how did you get here?
Yeah, sure, Kevin. And let me just take a step back and then tell you about the incredible journey for the last 20 years now. Incidentally, this is the 20th year because MakeMyTrip was born in 2000 when Deep Kalra, who had set it up on April 1, 2000. And then I, along with a couple of other co-founders, Keyur and Sachin, joined him as part of the founding team. And that's how the journey began. And so, while a lot of people would probably in today's time in the travel would be thinking more about COVID. So I think it'll be fair to say everything till now was pre-COVID, and then post-COVID, we will get into what is going to be the industry outlook and how do we think about MakeMyTrip. But just talking about pre-COVID or before COVID, BC, if you want to call it, rather than being before Christ, I guess before COVID now, in lighter vein. But, I think it can easily be divided into, I would say about 4 phases very quickly. And I'll explain you about these 4 phases. The first phase was very humble, very startup-like from 2000 to 2005. And as we set it up, we had all kinds of crises that hit us, like, talk about 9/11, talk about SARS, talk about .com burst, and later down 2008 financial crisis as well. But that was like second phase I'll come to. But from 2000 to 2005, India wasn't really ready for internet. I think we were ahead of our times. We realized that because internet ecosystem was not really robust at that point in time, from bandwidth to digital payment ecosystem and so on. The fundamental ecosystem was not really ready. So that went with, it was obviously full of challenges, as you could potentially imagine, from building the startup slowly and gradually to facing the challenges, and the resilience test and, having cash crunch and so on and so forth. In fact, the money that got committed to us during that phase by a VC actually ended up shutting the shop thanks to .com bust as well. And that all of that happened. So that was like first phase, full of learnings. And during that phase that we had an Ebookers, as you mentioned, little deal with them as well, where Deep and I were kind of leading that deal, doing a dual kind of a role to set the India operations for them. Ebookers was struggling from a cost optimization standpoint. So they looked at India as a BPO, emerging BPO, kind of country, if you will. And they came to India and they were looking for a management team and they're looking for travel domain and online. And they found MakeMyTrip had all of it in there. And then we struck a deal with them. So as part of that deal, I actually went the other side for setting up the India operations. And then when I kind of moved back, we obviously stayed in touch all the time, Deep and I. And when India was getting ready in September 2005, which I call 2006 to 2010 as the second phase of Make My Trip, I was back to Make My Trip to just relaunch and reset it up and then build from there together with the other co-founders that were already there. And that phase was very interesting. High growth phase. We never looked back. The internet ecosystem was improving. We were going from strength to strength. And guess what? In 4 years flat, we were actually, very close to kind of hitting the milestone, which led to IPO, which was probably one of the defining moments for Make My Trip in August 2010. When we IPO'd, we were like at a $40 million revenue. And it was a blockbuster IPO for whatever it's worth at that point in time. So that was the second phase, ended on a high. Then we got into the third phase, which was about 2011 to 2017, where we were expanding. Life as a public company started, highest level of scrutiny, highest level of corporate governance, the quarterly pressures and the works. But we kind of keep kind of embracing that, if you will. And by then I had kind of also changed hat from a CFO position to a CEO position. So we had a new CFO came on board right after IPO and all of that. I would also call this phase as building the hotel business, because we were predominantly air business and profitable when we IPO'd in 2010. So, and by the time 2017, we reached 2016-17, we were like 50% of our business was from hotels. So that was like building and scaling up the hotel business, which was the defined strategic objective even at the time of IPO. So that was probably the highlight, and I think it was also the highlight, which brings me to the last phase of before COVID, if you will, where the market disruption happened. The lot of the explosion, if I may call it, in the internet stocks happened. India started to get a lot more capital, lot more market disruption, and people started burning a lot of money and cash, and the pricing led disruption happened. And that is where, it kind of, the overall dynamics in the marketplace kind of led to a consolidation move. And we had Ibibo, which was kind of a number 2 OTA in the market, with Go Ibibo as well as Redbus merged with us. So we became like a strong 3 brands entity, about around 2016-17. And ever since that now, if I talk about, where we are today, we're like 3 years into the merger, very strong 3 powerful brands, leading market share, good kind of market cap, and then looking into kind of just getting to now all brands together on paths to profitability. So clearly it has been an overall incredible journey for the last 20 years.
Okay, thank you very much. That was great. So let's go right back. I'm always interested in, a bit like superheroes, the origin stories for people. I mean, how did you and Deep and the others, that really initial kind of group, that team, how was that assembled? Like the Avengers almost. I mean, what's that backstory there?
Yeah, no, I think it's obviously a fair question to ask. And it's quite interesting story, by the way. For I don't know how many people know this, but Deep is the one who actually founded it. We were not, it's not that the founding team came together to set it up. We actually met in Make My Trip. So Deep is the one who had this idea, built it. We all kind of liked the idea. So one by one, 4 of us, this was me, it's Sachin Bhatia, Keyur Joshi. In fact, Sachin Bhatia and Keyur Joshi were, they came on board just before I came on board. And that's how we kind of got together. So we actually met at Make My Trip. And it's kind of an interesting story that between, when Deep and I interacted for the first time. So we kind of liked each other. I was kind of sold on Deep more than the business model at that point in time, because internet was ahead of its time at that point in time. But I had the desire to work in an entrepreneurial setup, working with now I can say hindsight, the person like Deep who was entrepreneurial and visionary, and that's how we kind of got together. And in between, there was a situation that developed a little bit, which was interesting, where when I was in the middle of kind of my notice period from the previous employer and looking to join MakeMyTrip, the situation started developing at MakeMyTrip, where VC had started pulling back the money. And then I get a call from Deep and saying, listen, and for a gentleman, he explained me the position, because he had given me, the situation that we are kind of okay, we have money in the bank, this much is committed, etc., which was decent enough. And then, of course, I was supposed to come on board and contribute and also kind of take care of that aspect, if you will, given that I was going to join him as CFO. So which was totally fair. But then the situation developed, and then he came back and said, listen, this is what is the development. And also, the incumbent CFO who was on board at that point in time also had a situation with Enron going bust. And then, he was in the middle of kind of thing that, what do I do kind of thing. So he asked me a question. So he said, listen, what are you, I hope you are on board and you're not thinking twice and all that, but I wanted to be in spirit of full disclosure, share this development with you. And I remember telling him that, sink or swim, we will be together. I have no problem, because I've moved on. So even if the situation has developed on the funding side, it's okay, as long as you are thinking it from a long-term standpoint and you are there, and then we'll come and kind of together figure out the solution and all that. So that was a little interesting trivia between me and him when I came on board. But all of us actually met at MakeMyTrip. We were not either friends or from the same school or college before.
It's interesting that first. I mean, you referenced it in your initial kind of summary of the business and your time with it, but that first year and a half, 2 years was fairly traumatic for any kind of young business. Whether, as you said, there was 9/11 and the kind of the remnants of the .com crash and just everything that was going on in the travel industry post 9/11. I mean, what do you think? How did the business kind of prepare itself to get through that, or would it be fair to say that there was some good fortune as well involved?
Yeah, and most definitely, and in fact, it does play a role, a little bit here and there. But I guess when I look back and I kind of see, the couple of things kind of stand out. One, I think there was a conviction in the model per se. So, the conviction in the model got us going, right? So, I mean, the model was not necessarily new. It was a proven model in the other markets. It was a matter of time. It was not the question in our mind that whether it will succeed or not. I think that conviction existed and that got us going. And then with that, when that was very clear in our head, then it was just a question of managing resources, trying to make sure that how do we make sure that then the fundamental ecosystem improves. We kind of are still there, bootstrapping, maybe borrowing money, maybe pooling in our own funds, just managing the situation. And we were also lucky, by the way, and I think that's what happens in a challenging situation, that you will think harder and you will come up with some kind of a model that will help you survive during this crisis time. And maybe we were lucky there a little bit as well, that we managed to get one niche model going, which was US Indian residents based out of US, non-resident Indians coming back to India. So that was actually our legacy business. So that's how those 5 years, believe it or not, we survived on that model, where we didn't have to sell the online piece of it. We actually had a little call center in Delhi, a very small, modest call center with a 1-800-India-10 number for the non-resident Indians based out of US who were familiar with online portals. Will come on our portal in the US. We had a tiny office there in US. We still have that. And and they would call up on the call center. We'll give them special ethnic fares, and then they will travel back to India. That's how we used to get some revenue going. And it was a very niche kind of a model, which it did not have any kind of stiff competition, if you will. So it helped us get some cash, and then the Ebookers deal helped us get some cash as well. And then we kept working on the product. We also did one important thing, that we actually cut back on marketing immediately, realizing that India wasn't really ready. And therefore, when we raised another round of capital, when Sky started to open up, the low cost carriers came up in 2005, September 2005 to be precise, is when we relaunched it. So during that time, I think the learnings is that, one, of course, you have to be convinced that you are here for long haul. It can't be short term. So you can't be panicking, and you can't be, having doubts in your mind about the model per se. Pivoting can happen. The tweaks can happen. But it doesn't mean that, that the model is going to fail, as long as you have the conviction and the proof of concept. And once you have that, then it's all about just, managing it very, very frugal, and keep doing the right kind of stuff on the product side till the market opens up, and then you can, kind of go back and relaunch. Obviously, a test of resilience when you look back, because those were the times, by the way, we were all professionals and we had opportunity cost. All of us, we were not straight out of school or college. We were actually, already senior management, kind of employees in our previous avatars, right? I mean, Deep was working as vice president in GE. I was heading a North Zone for AppTech, which was an education company. And then I was working with a startup before I joined MakeMyTrip. But we were all established, or, kind of reached a certain level of, kind of experience in the corporate world. So we were already there. So there was opportunity cost. But I think what got us going was the conviction and the faith and the belief in the model.
One, definitely the last one from me before I hand over to David. I'm curious about the Ebookers period, primarily because I'm from the UK, I'm based in the UK, and when I first started writing about the travel industry, which was in 2005, the Ebookers CEO Dinesh Jama, who I'm sure was kind of held up as this almost kind of legendary figure in the UK as one of the kind of the pioneers of online travel agencies in the UK. And then he sold and kind of just became a recluse. And, his story is almost legendary in itself. But I mean, you would have been involved in that Ebookers period then and would have known Dinesh very well. Was there anything that you learned from him specifically that you then took on into those kind of formative years of MakeMyTrip after things started ramping up in 2005, just because he was this kind of legendary figure? Or at least there was an aura about him for sure.
Absolutely. Actually, a very, very interesting question. And I did leverage all the experience that I actually got in Ebookers, setting up in India all kinds of processes. What we were trying to do was to actually move many processes from Ebookers, UK and Europe, because they were kind of struggling with their cost structures, because it was damn expensive. And, travel is a low margin business. And Dinesh Dhamija actually had, one of the qualities that he had was that he was clear what was the end goal for Ebookers. So obviously he was, looking for a potential exit at some point in time, giving the returns to to his stakeholders, and therefore, one of the issues that he was encountering at that point in time was the cost structure. The Ebookers headquarters used to be in London, which was, Farrington Street in London. It used to be damn expensive real estate, right? And then Europe expansion that happened. It was an interesting kind of transition from Flight Bookers, by the way. I'm sure you would know Flight Bookers, which was an offline travel company, to come to Ebookers. So because he saw online travel coming, much ahead of probably many others. So from that point of view, I think he was like clearly first off the block there in that market. But the interesting piece, where I learned a lot, was also specific to travel as well as online travel was a lot of every little process, whether it was a sales process or it was a service process or it was a voice process or, you know, email, back office support. We migrated up IT services. We built up financial services. You know, so the whole online travel company, all aspects of the business, we actually migrated and learned and delivered out of the Ebookers India office. It was actually from scratch, literally. It was like from the first employee, literally brick by brick we built. And when I kind of exited, when I was an acting CEO for the India operations, we were like 1,500, 2,000 people. So, and a variety of processes that we had migrated. So that really, really helped me. So, you know, so my kind of coming back home to make my trip in to early 2006 when we relaunched, I was very well equipped from the learning standpoint, if you will, from, you know, because, you know, every aspect of online travel business at a scale I had dealt with. So that obviously helped me to apply all of that learning back here at Make My Trip, and, you know, which was from 2006 onwards. And then we've just, you know, kind of kept building up, kept scaling up the operations. But there were clearly learnings when you would do your board meetings with Dinesh Damija and his wife Tani Damija used to be involved as well. From their point of view, the biggest one that stands out for me, I think the clarity of thought and the goal was very, very clear. You know, this was the end goal, and that's where he was kind of driving his, you know, execution roadmap, if you will.
Well, Rajesh, it's funny. I was actually about to ask. My first question was going to be in depth on Ebookers there, because just as a comment now, it seems like you basically kind of drafted off of them for 4 to 5 years, where you basically they paid you to learn all the ropes and for you to kind of wait for the right timing for the Indian market to mature. Would you agree with that characterization?
Yeah, I think it kind of worked out like that. I don't think it was by design. Obviously not, because, you know, the deal actually came to Make My Trip. Now, my introduction to Ebookers was via Make My Trip, where we were actually building it together. At one point in time, Deep and I were doing it together, dual role. I was also supposed to be involved in Make My Trip. So was he. But then one thing led to another, and then I switched. But, you know, I think yes, it wasn't like by design. It definitely happened, but it kind of helped immensely for sure, because my knowledge about the online travel, full aspects of business at a scale, definitely helped me bring all those learnings back into Make My Trip, and then, you know, kind of build and scale up the company along with Deep and the others to greater heights as we are today.
So I wanted to kind of delve into that. So timing is a really is a I feel like the number of great ideas out there, Webvan before Instacart and kind of stuff like that. Timing is everything. You guys clearly launched a little something, determined the timing was wrong, went and did the ebookers kind of gig, and came back in 2005. What was it about 2005 that you guys started seeing? Was it the low cost carriers and that was it? That basically said the timing is right. India is going to be ascendant.
Actually, two or three things. So low cost carriers was definitely one of them. And then there is also an Indian Railways portal that kind of started called IRCTC that opened up as well. And then more importantly, the internet, penetration started to improve. The internet infrastructure relative to 2000 started to improve. It was actually still very poor. It was, the broadband wasn't really there. Broadband, by the way, for the longest time till even 2010 was abysmally low. It was narrow band for all these years, but it was better than what it was in 2000. The payment gateways, the digital payment ecosystem started to improve. So it gave us an impression that one, on the travel side, it's kind of opening up. The second is the internet ecosystem that is improving. And so the unidimensional products like ticketing, like air ticketing, or for that matter, subsequently that opened because Indian Railways was actually initially not distributing through OTAs, but subsequently then they decided to do it. But they were all unidimensional products. They were not like very involved buying kind of products online, unlike hotels, because hotels took a lot more time. It also needed high quality bandwidth because of the content that you have to render is pretty rich. So, those are the few developments at that point in time that helped us decide. And then, of course, when we were also exploring to raise more money, and safe partners at that point in time kind of looked at it from a VC standpoint, and also felt that the time is perhaps now right for us to relaunch. So I guess the bunch of factors came together for us to think that it probably is the appropriate time to relaunch it.
So kind of as you relaunch this, you mentioned that this was obviously a tried and true model, the OTA model that you were applying to India, and so I find that there is always wonderful growing pain stories whenever someone is applying a tried and true model to a developing economy like that. And I'd love it if you could kind of just elaborate a little bit more on kind of like what were some of those kind of misconnections moments between you and the market you guys were trying to address?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Actually, you are so right, because especially in the developing and emerging countries, there are nuances which are very different, and therefore, just although OTA model was tried and tested in the Western world, but you would not necessarily be able to do complete copy paste. I think that is the biggest mistake that anyone can do when you are looking at evolved models who have done really, really well, trying to take it to an emerging market without understanding and knowledge of that market, the nuances that kind of brings in. I'll give you a very interesting one. And I think at some level it was embarrassing at that point in time. We did not have e-ticket. We had paper tickets. So when we relaunched, it was not electronic ticket. It was all paper tickets. And we used to actually, package all those paper tickets in the couriers and then send at the end of every day. We were inundated by bookings at that point in time, because the alternative was damn painful or opaque for that matter, right? It was not transparent at all with the offline traditional travel agent. And as it was launched, it became very popular because it was user friendly. It was also very transparent and so on. So from consumer perspective, we had a lot of traffic coming on our portal right away, but we didn't know what to do because we couldn't actually fulfill it, because it wasn't like electronic. It is not like today that you make the payment and then you have within few seconds you actually have your electronic ticket or hotel voucher or booking voucher with you for every booking. So and stuff like that, when you start looking at it. And similarly on the supply side, it was not a plug and play. I remember that we were the first ones to actually build direct connects with the low cost carriers. It did not exist. They didn't even know how to do it, because if you look at the evolved markets on the air side, you will have GDS connectivity, which is hosting the entire airline's content, and there is a clear connectivity between GDS and the OTA, and you actually have end-to-end kind of booking experience, which was not a cakewalk in India. It was completely different, because for low-cost carrier, you had to do direct connect. There was no GDS element in between, and you have to just work on these direct connects and then kind of go through all the nuances along with them. So it has been a major evolution. And similarly, if I just kind of also talk about hotel supply side network, given the fact that it was highly fragmented, and most of the emerging markets is highly fragmented. It is not necessarily consolidated, confined to few handful of chains who are one tech savvy, and also there are the platform that are hosting their contents, and then you can just go and plug and play. You actually have to do huge amount of heavy lifting in terms of giving them access through a user-friendly technology or tool that you will build and invest behind, and then educate them to adapt, um, because adoption is also really, really poor. It takes years together for them to be able to just get used to it and do it. And most of the times you have to end up doing manually with your own team. while you are going through this growing pains and so on. So, while on the face of it, it'll look like that everything is hunky-dory on an online side, but in emerging markets, it is actually back end is at times is very clunky. Over the years, it gets streamlined and it becomes completely seamless and frictionless.
So what are some, like, I'm curious, what are some of the things you did to kind of, you said it's hunky-dory on the front end, but, it's almost like scotch tape on the back end. I remember hearing a story about, in India in particular, and I don't know if this is legend or not, but I'm just going to throw it out there anyways, is that an Amazon competitor in India was struggling with how to deliver their packages in India, and they literally hired the sorry, not the X, the current kind of your equivalent of the UPS, your normal national mail people during their off hours. So if they work from 9 to 6, they'd hire them from 6 to 10, and those people knew their neighborhoods really well, and that was their kind of hack, because in a lot of India there wasn't real addresses. And actually, I was reminded that when you mentioned the thing about couriering your tickets to people, and I'm just like, I think that you, like, so many developing developing country OTAs, yeah, you have this like beautiful interface that actually looks like everyone else's, interface, like Orbis and Expedia, but you're here on the back end, duct taping everything back together. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. And by the way, in the spirit of disclosure, I'll tell you that the Amazon competition in India is Flipkart, and I've been on their board for many years as well.
did
And
they
they've
do that?
yes,
Is that story
did
true?
that. They did that in the past, and they
Cool.
evolved from that. Of course, absolutely.
It's funny.
It's
I
also
heard that story, and I kept on trying to find a way to verify it, and I knew it was Flipkart.
yeah,
But yeah, that's great. I'm glad to hear it. I'll follow up with
absolutely.
you.
Flipkart is also now, Walmart invested in Flipkart some time back as well. But product e-commerce also went through this because they also had massive logistics operations to take care of it. So the evolution on logistics and warehousing, by the way, where it stands today and what it was few years, about 10 years ago, there is a massive difference. There's a sea difference in, now there's cutting edge technologies used even in warehousing and so on and so forth. So we've come a long way in India, but that's how it started. That's how it started. And then, like I was telling you, our example on the supply side, it was fairly clunky. In fact, we at one point in time, we actually used to have massive in-house call center operations, which was also true for ebookers for that matter, and that was all sitting in India, which is what kind of optimized the cost for them. But I remember 2008 was our first kind of milestone rebadging deal with about 250 call center employees, transitioning them to IBM Daksha at that point in time, because we said, our DNA for MakeMyTrip was more tech oriented, and this whole call center back office operations could be better handled by the BPO outfit. And we rebadged, and then when we're working on technology over the years to make the experience more self-service rather than just growing on call center, leveraging technology. And the smartphones actually changed the game. When smartphones came, India, like China, became an app market. And that device kind of helped us to tremendously improve the experience overall from a customer standpoint end to end. So that has actually for the last 5 years, that has been a game changer in the online evolution of Indian online market as well.
Now, Rajesh, we're kind of jumping around a little bit here in the timeline of the story, but this is all really good. I mean, I'm curious now a little bit about the process that led up to the public listing. It was such a major achievement, I think, for an Indian tech company to do that. I mean, how did you as a team and yourself personally kind of approach that phase and get through it? And are any of the kind of like war stories that you gained along the way that you're able to kind of share with us through that process?
No, sure. I mean, it's obviously a very, very defining kind of milestone moment for the company. I mean, personally, it was satisfying as well. I know for the whole management team, given the kind of what it takes to kind of become a public company as well. but more from a process standpoint. And before that, maybe an interesting trivia. In fact, uh, when we started kind of talking about that, maybe there is a potential now we can just take the company to public. We started kind of thinking about it. Had a debate on our board, and the bigger debate was whether we should list in India, given that underneath businesses in India, or should we list in US. And the house was kind of divided. It wasn't like a unanimous kind of the view, if you will, wasn't that we should list in US or India. So we kind of gone through you kind of went through that debate that happened. I think there was merit in the argument for India listing as well, given that the underneath business was in India. But we, all things considered, we decided in favor of US, because the understanding of the internet business model was much more with the investor community in the US as well as in the analyst community. And we weren't really, for whatever it's worth, were concerned about corporate governance levels or higher level of scrutiny, because of the fact that we believed, even in the private setup, we were actually running it quite professionally. We used to have independent directors much before we went public, just to give you an example. So the level of corporate governance, we were all very comfortable. We were all professionals, as I mentioned earlier. We had some experience of operating in large companies, and how the corporate governance models kind of work. So and fundamentally also, we kind of believed in it, that if you have to scale up the company, you have to put that kind of process and structure in place. So as we were kind of going through this process, obviously was very time consuming. One side, you obviously have to make sure that the business goals are met, because if the business goals are not met, then all that hard work that you do from a pure IPO process standpoint, just whatever it takes for you to be able to do it from prospectus stage to to taking the company public, everything can go waste. So you actually have to have independent parallel tracks. And a lot of people think that there is a war room that is kind of just a few bunch of people kind of sitting and doing the process, which is true, which is the whole finance team or critical people in finance team. The CFO obviously is up to its neck for this, and then there are lawyers, the auditors, the advisors, the bankers. So you you have all kinds of people who come together to kind of just pull this one off. But most important aspect also is to also keep running the business and making sure the business goals are also met. And I think from my point of view, while on one track, it was important to run the process at a speed, and I think we ended up doing it in a record time. A lot of people tell me that, but it was okay. I mean, I didn't pay that much attention to maybe the number of hours was, say, maybe we stretched a lot more in that confined period of 6 months that we ended up kind of from end to end deliver this project. But I think the important piece was, and maybe for the listeners as well, whosoever is thinking about it, not to forget about the other important track, because you won't be able to get out if your goals are not met. Because at the end of the day, you are going to sell the story on the back of the business goals that you would have delivered. Not necessarily you are going to kind of go out and tell how hardworking it was for the team for us to be able to get to that position. I don't think that's really, and that's important, when you look at it from a different lens. But I think it's critical to keep the parallel track going. I think that was the learning. So the ability to keep both going at the same pace, mutually exclusively, and not getting both the tracks going off track, was the biggest one, if you ask me. And then, of course, when you get there, you ring the bell and all that is very, very satisfying. And I think the satisfaction comes from two aspects. One, that you deliver value to the stakeholders, existing stakeholders, and the journey begins for the new ones, right? And there was no doubt in our mind. It wasn't the exit for the founders or the management team. It was actually the beginning, if you will, because the new investors come in and invest in you raise money. And the second, which is actually more critical, was from the people side, because we had a deep ESOP plan, and seeing that people seeing suddenly the paper stock very, very valuable was extremely satisfying for us. And, there are stories around people buying homes and stuff. So I guess those
Yeah.
were really high moments.
Yeah, I've heard Deep talking about that before at a conference. And one thing I've always been curious, and I ask this question with as much respect as I can, but with a certain amount of curiosity, and that is often, and not just in travel, but around many tech companies, it is such a milestone when they get to list publicly that often the founding team do tend to drift away after that. It's fairly unusual for at least two of the founders, yourself and Deep, 10 years on from that public listing to still be massively involved in running the company. So before David wraps us up with his final question, I'm curious as to what kind of keeps you there, because you've achieved so many milestones. And, personally, it would be, okay, well, I'm done. I might as well move on. So what does keep you there?
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting one. And this is, you are not the only one who's been asking this question time. We keep getting this question off and on because a lot of people actually see that happening in the marketplace with many other companies. I think it's, from our point of view, it's just perhaps simple. See, we did have two co-founders who kind of moved on and are doing their new businesses and stuff. Actually, Kayur is still on our advisory board. Sachin has been, kind of involved in other projects. He's now running another social e-commerce company. But from Deep and my point of view, I think it was more that we kept enjoying because we were running a public company. So there was an experience of running a public company, the experience of scaling up the company. And then there was market consolidation move happened. We became from one brand to we became three brands. And I guess, we have over the last 10 years post IPO also, I don't know whether there has been any dull moment, to be honest. So it has just kept us very busy with the business, with the thought that best is still yet to come. So, so when you keep thinking like that and you're still enjoying, I guess you don't end up thinking maybe anything different. And that is so true because we've just been very busy, kind of running the business for the last 10 years, and continue to believe that there is more headroom and there are more opportunities. And every milestone after milestone that you've been able to get to, and that is something that keeps you going, I would have thought.
Thanks, Rajesh. So I have one kind of wrap-up question. You said something interesting, how a lot of people, when they try to go to foreign markets or apply a foreign concept to their own home market, they just copy and paste is the term you use, and I like that. I kind of wanted to ask you, what countries and what markets right now are you most excited about outside of India that you look at and go, you guys could potentially expand, or you just think there's a lot of opportunity? And also, just kind of I guess extra credit question here is, what company has had the most spectacular failure in copy and pasting into a foreign market?
Oh, wow. The second one is an interesting one, and I don't know if I can name one, but let me just tell you the first one first. Um, uh, you know, uh, I think there are many interesting markets. And, as we look around, definitely all the emerging markets. I mean, I'm keeping China aside because China has evolved quite a bit already. But, in Southeast Asia, Indonesia has been also very much, great market, great potential. Before that, if you look at it on the other side, Brazil was a very good market as well. And now Vietnam is kind of opening up as well. I mean, so there are these kind of hidden gems, if you will, which would definitely be kind of offer a lot of potential, if you will. There's also an interesting market that we see from our point of view, barring the Southeast Asian markets. It's also Middle East market. I don't think there is an OTA, local OTA that has been well established there. I think it's just more because of I think it's this booking.com and all the global OTAs that are out there. And it's also it's also an interesting market from a potential standpoint. So these are some of these interesting markets which has a lot of potential and might be different because every market is offers something unique, has something very unique, which is not necessarily there in the Western market, or for that matter, even in China or India for that matter, right? So as we go, like for example, we do have our Redbus brand actually operating in some of these markets. We have externalized that brand. We've been able to take Redbus to some of these markets, with the same kind of playbook that we had built full stack. And you learn huge amount of unique things in Indonesia. Like you would see in LATAM that there is a lot of, the credit market is very different. So, so there different markets will offer huge potential, but will also come up with their own interesting nuances that you will have to be there and learn. I don't think you can just kind of, bring a concept and then just, kind of just take a cookie cutter approach and kind of implement there. That doesn't work. In terms of your other question, I think that without naming, I think it is just fair to say that it will be more where the decision making is very centralized, but I still want to run an operation in an emerging market. I think that is where the biggest gap is, because it doesn't give agility to the local operations, in terms of whatever you want to do as part of your running that business. And also becomes very difficult for the local team and management to be able to just gather all the knowledge, stitch everything together. I think it probably kind of get lost in back and forth more than they could, if there was full-fledged empowered operations in the emerging markets, if you will. So that has been my observation, which kind of is very different. I'm pretty sure that there are other ways of kind of, these large global players also do it, but, especially in emerging markets, it becomes really tough.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rajesh. That was great. I mean, there's some of your backstories there. We interviewed Stuart Crichton from ClearTrip just before, in the back end of 2019, and he had some similar stories about what it was like in those early days in the mid 2000s, creating that business in India as well. So it's great to get your perspective as well. So again, thank you very much, Rajesh, for joining us on How I Got Here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Okay, that's great. So that's it from another episode of How I Got Here. That's Mozio and PhocusWire's weekly stories where we speak to the entrepreneurs and innovators in travel and transportation. As always, you can find us, if you haven't subscribed already, to the podcast on Spotify, Alexa, Google Podcasts, all the usual places. So go on there, give us a review. We always appreciate it. Thanks ever so much to everybody. Thanks ever so much from David and I for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Kevin.
Thanks for listening to the How I Got Here podcast. We'll be back next week with more insight stories behind startups and innovation in travel and transportation. Check mozio.com/move for a complete write-up of the highlights of every podcast with translations into 5 languages, and get your daily dose of news on the digital travel economy by subscribing to the newsletter at PhocusWire.com. See you next week.